Throughout Christian history, some of the most prominent intellectual Christian forces around have boldly proclaimed that Jesus Christ is both passable and impassable, both visible and invisible, both made and not made, both God and man. And the list of these things goes on and on and on. But wait a minute, aren't all those things just contradictions? So in today's video, I want to discuss a topic termed in the literature as the logical problem of the incarnation. Now, this is a problem which focuses on the fact that if one wants to affirm that Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man, as Orthodox Trinitarians and Christians have always believed, then the issue is going to be that there are these properties that Jesus would have as a man, which would seemingly contradict the properties that he has as God. For example, God can't die, but Jesus died, or God doesn't sleep, but Jesus slept. Or what is more obvious in the literature is things like God is impassable if you're if you're a classical theist. However, Jesus is passable qua his humanity. So then the issue seems to be, well, then you have these sets of properties which seem to contradict each other, and then, well, saying that Jesus is God is just a contradiction, right? So therefore Christianity cannot be true. Well, the most common Christian response to this is just to use what is known as a qua operator, which is a linguistic operator which just works as saying that something is true of this subject in virtue of this. So, for example, a Christian might respond, well, yeah, Jesus is impassable, however, that is qua, or in virtue of, his divinity. Yes, Jesus is passable, however, that is qua, or in virtue of his humanity. Now, the point here is that a true contradiction can only be said when these properties negate one another in the same respective manner. For example, like humans may have immaterial souls and material bodies, yet immateriality negates materiality. But because a human doesn't have a soul as the same thing as the body, they're distinct things, then therefore one cannot say that that is a true contradiction. So then the point of the logical incarnation, the logical problem of the incarnation, that is, seeks to contravene this thinking from the Christian by saying, well, really, we are talking in the same respect because the question I'm asking you is with regards to the person of Jesus Christ. So when we think of just the person of Jesus Christ, and in formal logic as well, we may just say the following statement: Jesus is impassable and Jesus is passable. Now, this formal issue has to be modified in some sense to save the problem. So, for example, you have the subject of the sentence, which is Jesus. You have the copula of the sentence, which is, which attaches the subject and the predicate. And you have the predicate or the quality ascribed in the sentence, which is either passable or impassable. Now, the issue is, it seems like this prior solution that I just gave you, which is the most common Christian one that we hear today, seems to modify the subject of the sentence. So rather than saying Jesus is impassable, we're saying Jesus's divinity is impassable. Jesus's humanity is impassable. However, that seems to create two distinct subjects, which would be the heresy of Nestorianism, dividing Christ into two persons or two subjects. And although I do think that there may be plausible ways to get around this objection levied against the Christian, I do also think that there is some good literature responding to this issue without having to take this solution and facing this problem that we see here. So, what is the best way to get around this logical problem of the incarnation? Now, what if I told you that the church has never actually believed these things to be contradictions? And what if I also told you that the best way to solve this issue is to actually deny that these predicates actually contradict each other? Wait a minute, it seems to obviously be the case that these things are contradictions, so what does Thomas Apologia mean here? Well, philosopher Timothy Pawl, in his book on Concilia Christology, allows us to understand that we could define these predicates in such a way, these qualities that we ascribe to Jesus, we could understand them in such a way that they don't actually truly contradict one another. Paul, in his book, offers this analogy. Let's suppose for a moment the odd scenario that everything that exists has an arm. Now, these arms can either be bent or not bent. So let's quickly define these qualities, bent and not bent. Arm bent is just S is arm bent, just in case S has an arm that is bent 90 degrees or more. Arm unbent is that S is arm unbent, just in case S has an arm that is not bent at 90 degrees or more. Now, those seemingly are contradictory predicates, but let's imagine in this world that a cheerleader with two arms exists, as the only person as well with two arms. Now, let's say that this cheerleader has one arm which is arm bent and one arm which is arm non-bent. Well, in this scenario, it would be apt to say of the cheerleader, she is arm bent and she is arm unbent. Both predicates are truly said of the cheerleader without contradiction. And why is this without contradiction? Well, let's think about the definition of arm bent and arm unbent again. S is arm bent just in case S has an arm that is bent 90 degrees or more. But it's not a contradiction to have an arm which is bent 90 degrees or more and an arm which is not bent 90 degrees or more, right? That's not actually a true contradiction. Now, consider that we may usually define in the Incarnation, just in everyday thought, we may think of things like impassibility as the inability to be affected by anything else, or passibility as the ability to be affected by something else. And if you can truly define these things of Christ, then that would mean there is a true contradiction. And I would agree in some sense that someone may be able to levy this criticism against someone who believes in Jesus if that is the way that they define those predicates. However, Paul offers a different definition of these predicates which seem to dissolve the contradiction away. And that is, passibility is that S is passible just in case S has a concrete nature that is passible for some other thing to causally affect. Or impassibility is that S is impassible just in case S has a concrete nature that is impassible for some other thing to causally affect it. Now, according to these definitions, no contradiction is produced. Similarly to the cheerleader analogy, no contradiction is actually produced because, of course, when we're referring to the predicate to the natures aren't the same, so thus there isn't an actual contradiction. But notice that the equivocation here isn't on the subject of the sentence, Jesus is passible and Jesus is impassible, but rather on the predicate of the sentence, passibility and impassibility. So we don't get the charge of Nestorianism against this position. Now, the only time that we may be able to say things like this is in cases that things like this are contradictions, are in cases of one-natured creatures, which would be pretty much all of the time, right? For in the case of one-natured things, one can derive a contradiction from it being both passible and impassible. However, to quote John Duns Scotus, he says this regarding the issue. Quote, "This does not follow. This animal is blind, therefore it does not see, unless the animal has just one nature, to which one visual system belongs. For if the animal had two natures to which two visual systems belonged, it would follow only that the animal does not see according to that nature, according to which it is blind." And also to quote Geoffrey Dunn in his paper on divine impassibility and Christology in the Christmas homilies of St. Leo the Great, quote, "What we discover in these homilies is acknowledgement that impassibility is part of the nature of divinity, that Jesus was passible through his human nature, and that Jesus could be both impassible and passible at the same time without there being any contradiction." With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you did enjoy this video. To support my channel, please like, subscribe, and especially share this video to anyone who is facing the issue of, but isn't Jesus a contradiction? With that being said, God bless.